Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are, before we begin, let me just place the link in the chat. If you would like to review anything or catch up on anything, you could find it there on our website, which is now in the chat. If you wanted to check out there, or if you would like to sign up for weekly reminders also, that's also going to be, do that on our website. All right, we are in the middle of the 8th chapter of Kohelet, and we've been discussing an interesting idea. He's been getting into this narrative about what exactly, how a wise person acts, what distinguishes a wise person, and particularly what he's been discussing this interesting idea of how a wise person approaches power. And have this dynamic between the wise person and the powerful person, and how they relate to each other. And we said that the wise person, this is already going back a number of weeks already, but the wise person is never has to be concerned with power when facing the powerful, because they know that power is limited, human power is limited, and that their wisdom can circumvent that. We said that there's two ways that the wise person sees the limits of human power. The first way is in the fact that it's limited by time. We've discussed that now at length. Last week, we finished up that discussion of what is the limit to power based on time. All right? In other words, that due to the fact that people, their ideas don't last forever, the literal power of the people don't last forever. As soon as they disappear, there's suddenly a power vacuum, and people will say whatever they need to come into power. It just goes to show, in a general sense, the limits to power based on time. And now there was another thing that Kohelet mentioned to us as another reason why human power is limited. And what he referred to it earlier was mishpat, justice, but it's the way we translated it earlier was jurisdiction. In other words, that human power is limited in the fact that it can only go so far. It can't extend, for example, can't extend into your mind. Maybe it could to a certain degree, but there's always going to be some power that you retain beyond what other people want to inflict upon you. So while you may have people who want to control you, there's only so far that they're going to be able to do that, because they can't, there's only so far that their hands can reach. And that's, God willing, what we will discuss this week, what we'll start to see in this week's discussion. So without any further ado, let me jump to our screen share. Okay, there we go. I actually have this not set up. There we go. Nope. This one. All right. Okay, and this is chapter 8, verse number 12. Chapter 8, verse number 12. And the coming verses are actually all going to be kind of long verses for some reason. So we will take them one by one as we do. But it's just interesting to note that this whole piece is going to be some long verses. I don't know why that is. I don't necessarily have an answer why he lumps a lot of thoughts into one piece, but into one verse. But there's just to note, if you are wondering why the text is a little smaller than usual, it's just because these verses are going to need a little more space on the page to fill them all up. So, okay, verse 14 over here says like this: Yesh hevel asher naasa al haaretz. There is a hevel that is done on the land. Now, again, we've discussed multiple times what is this idea of hevel, but for ease of translation right now, we'll just refer to it as there is something wrong, okay, or something difficult. Asher naasa al haaretz, that is done on the land, okay. Asher, that there is. Yesh tzadikim asher magia alehem k'maaseh harashaim. There are righteous people who have occurred to them that comes to them like the action of the wicked. V'yesh rashaim, and there are wicked people shemagi'a alehem k'maaseh tzadikim, that it happens to them like the actions of the tzaddik, of the righteous. Amarti shagam zeh havel, and I say that this also is havel, is this havel thing. Okay, let's read that all one more time. Again, a lot of words. Yesh havel asher nasal haaretz, there is something havel on the land. Asher yesh tzadikim, that is that there are righteous people. Asher magia alehem k'maaseh harashaim, and it comes to them. It catches up with them the actions of the wicked, like the actions of the wicked. I'm sorry. V'yesh hashaim, and there's also wicked people. Shemagia alehem k'maaseh tzadikim, that it happens to them the actions of the righteous. Amarti, I say, shagam zeh havel, that this is also havel. Okay, so we have over here this verse, again, a long verse, and there's a number of questions that will pop up to you right away. But before I get to the questions, actually, let's just see. The commentaries over here, they say a pretty simple idea, or relatively simple idea. Again, depending on how we want to look at the book of Kohelet, we could look at it either in a empowering light, which is how we like to do it, or there's always a way you could always technically read the book of Kohelet as a kind of a downer of a book, right? That's definitely a possibility. So if you want to read the book that way, then this is another one of our cases of a verse that's ripe for the interpretation in that way. And it's saying that look how futile the world is, that you have righteous people. It means that people who act righteously, but nevertheless get the fate of the wicked. And you have wicked people that have the fate of the righteous, okay? And that all is just, it's so futile, okay? This is the tack that's taken by Rashi, for example, the king of the commentators, if you will. He does take that, it's a relatively simplistic reading of the verse, and he says, yeah, this is a verse telling you that, unfortunately, the reality is that sometimes righteous people looks like righteous people get the fate of what we would expect the wicked to get, and conversely, you have the wicked people who get what we would assume to be the fate of the righteous. Now, this could take us down an entire rabbit hole. There's no question about that. It's in Jewish philosophy. This is referred to as the question of tzaddik v'ra'lo and rasha v'tovlo. If you have a righteous person, but bad things happen to righteous people and good things happen to wicked people, that's a long discussion, as I said before. And there's no question that if we wanted to go down that track and really get into discussion about that, we could. The entire book of Eov, of Job, is written to address that question, which is, by the way, just as a side point, that those are two separate questions. Why do good things happen to bad people? Sorry, why do bad things happen to good people first? And secondly is why do bad things, I twisted myself around. Question one is why do bad things happen to good people? And question two is why do good things happen to bad people? It's worth noting that philosophically, those are two separate questions, because many of your answers that you'll have for why bad things happen to good people will not answer the question of why good things happen to bad people, which if we did a study on the book of Job, that would be a focus of research, is understanding why those are separate questions. But again, we are not studying the book of Job. If we wanted to read Kohelet that way, we could say that that's he's lamenting the reality of the world, that sometimes you find that wicked people get good stuff and righteous people get bad stuff. And that would be a havel. That would be something that's just identified as futile, or if we want to go with how we understand havel, it's something that's generally not going to be helpful for us, but with enough understanding and enough work and toil, we'll get to something, we'll get to a conclusion that is satisfying. Okay, so that would be a simple rendering of the verse over here. Now, Rashi himself actually points out that there are other ways to interpret this verse. He just doesn't like them. He, as Rashi does, he's going with a more simplistic rendering of the verse. That is his goal, his stated goal, actually, in his very first comment on the very first book of the Bible. That's his goal in general. So that does allow and open up for interpretation other meanings of this verse. So with that understanding and with that kind of springboard, let's look at this verse a little bit more and try to see. There's a couple of things that are going to stand out for us as questions on why, on just the wording of the verse over here. Okay, the first question is that I would say is we have two declarations of Hevel. Okay, in the first line of the verse over here, he says, "Yesh Hevel asher nasa al haaretz." There is a Hevel that is done on the land. Okay, and he says, what's that Hevel? The Hevel is that tzaddikim have this thing occur to them, the actions of the wicked. Okay, and then at the end of the verse, where he says, and there are wicked people who have done to them the actions of the righteous, he says, I say that this too is Hevel. So question number one that would face that occurred to me when I was first reading this verse is, why are there two declarations of Havel in one verse? He does do that a number of times in the book. We have seen that the first mention of Havel is Havel Havolim Amar Kohelet, that futility of futilities or steam of steams, right? However we want to translate the word Havel. So he does do that doubling up of Havel sometimes. But over here, I would say that there's also another hint to the fact that there's something else going on. And that is the fact that in the beginning of the verse, he makes it as an obvious declaration. He says there's a Hevel that's done on the land, something that's clearly Havel. Okay. In the end of the verse, he changes his tone. He does not say it's clearly Havel. He says, I would say, Amarti, I say Shagam Zahavel, that this too is Havel. So there's two things over there. Number one, he says, I say, meaning it's not an obvious thing. You need me to tell you that it's Havel. And second thing is that he says this also Shegam Zeh, that this too is Havel. Okay, so if you, that kind of reinforces the point that there seems to be two different statements of Havel going on in this verse, and one of them is obvious and one of them needs to be inferred. One of them needs to be pulled out of the idea. So that I would say is question number one, or questions number 1 and 2. Okay. The next thing that I want to get to, the next question that kind of stands out to me is, let's look a little further in the verse. It says, Asher yesh tzadikim, that there are righteous people, Asher magia lehem, that it reaches them, Kamaaseh harishayim, like the actions of the wicked, or the action of the wicked, actually. It does not say Kamaaseh with a yud, it's Kamaaseh with a hey. Okay, the difference between those two is Maaseh, like spelled like this, is a singular action, as opposed to Maaseh with a yud. If we dropped the letter hey and replaced it with a yud, that would be plural, the actions of. Okay, just before I continue with that, this word magia, I don't know if we've had that show up yet. The shoresh, the root word over there, is there's a missing letter yud over here. Not missing, but the way the nature of the shoresh of Hebrew roots is that yuds can fall away. So there's a yud, a gimel, and ein. Yaga means to literally to touch or to reach. So it reaches them, the action of the wicked. Okay. But it's interesting to note that we do have this action of the wicked, again, singular action, and of the wicked. But that's not really the question. The question that really stands out is, he does not say there are righteous people that get the consequences of the wicked. He doesn't say that they get the punishment of the wicked or the effects of what we would expect the wicked to get. Rather, he says you have righteous people that get the action of the wicked. That's a strange thing. It shouldn't be he's saying that they get the action of the wicked. He should say, if we're going to read it like the simple understanding, which again is the base understanding of the verse. If we're going to say that you have righteous people that look like they're getting punished, well, that's not Maaseh harishayim. That is something else. I would have to think about what exactly the phrase would be, but it's not going to be Maaseh harishayim. Maasim are actions, things that people do, not things that happen to people. So in that sense, it would seem to be that we're stuck with also a little question over here of why does he choose the word kima'aseh harisha'im, like the action of the wicked? Okay. Okay. So again, our two main questions are number one, when we split the verse, we find that the first half of the verse is declared to be Havel from the get-go, and he seems to almost assume it to be an obvious idea that this is Havel. And the second half of the verse is only a Havel if you think about it. You need King Solomon to tell you that it's Havel. Okay. And the second piece of it is that for some reason, it's not that the righteous get punished like the wicked, or the wicked get rewarded like the righteous. Rather, it's that the righteous get the actions of the wicked and the wicked get the actions of the righteous. What exactly does that mean?
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yeah,
Could
sure.
it not mean that the righteous perform wicked acts and the wicked perform righteous acts on occasion? That's how I read it.
Very good. That is kind of the direction I'm going to go in. Yeah, thank you for taking it that direction, because that's exactly, I think, where we're going to take it. Again, this is not like Rashi. So if you looked at Rashi, you would not find this interpretation. That's why it's kind of, it does not come obviously to that. We wouldn't come obviously to that interpretation. But as Jacob is saying over here, I think what he's saying over here is that you have righteous people that not that they get the consequences of the Risha'im, not that they get punished or treated like the wicked, but rather you have righteous people who happen to do actions like the wicked. Okay, and conversely, you have wicked people who do actions like the righteous. Now, I don't know a little differently than Jacob. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that Jacob is saying sometimes you have righteous people who do wicked things. That's also true. I will say that that's definitely true. And conversely, you would have wicked people who do righteous things. I was really going to go in a little different, similar but little different take, is that you have righteous people who, even though their actions and intentions are righteous, but the outcomes of their actions are wicked. And conversely, you have wicked people who their intent is to do something that is inherently wicked. Again, I don't love the word wicked, but it's just the easiest word to use, because it's got, connotations of fire and brimstone wickedness. But you have people who are evil, who are bad people, for lack of a better term, and nevertheless, even though their intentions are for the wrong, but the outcome of their actions are correct. So I think one of the reasons why I'm going with that, Jacob, as opposed to exactly what you're saying, again, it's similar but a little different, is he says, Kim ma'aseh harashim. It's like the actions of the wicked. So it's not that they're doing wicked actions, but the outcome of their actions are like the actions of the wicked. I mean, we've seen this, again, we've actually discussed this a number of times, but we see this throughout history, is that people who have good intentions, the outcomes of their actions are not good. They don't have the intended effect. And similarly, you would have the opposite, where people their entire goal is to do something evil, something terrible, and in the end, it creates an opposite effect. I was thinking in my brain, maybe I could say, Hitler tried to kill us, and we grew beyond that. And that was not a perfect example, because he still did a lot of destruction in the meantime. I would have to think exactly of a good case of that, good illustration of that. But you do have wicked people who are doing actions with the intent to be wicked, or to do things that are we would consider evil, but at the same time, the outcome of their actions, they actually get the consequences are as though they did a good action, as though they did a right action. Okay. I mean, plug in whichever politician you want to plug in either of these cases. You're sure you can apply this. So what we have over here is that the verse is telling us two separate things. Number one is that you have righteous people who, unfortunately, and potentially from no fault of their own, but the outcome of their actions is wicked. Okay, the outcome of their actions is as though somebody had tried to do something wicked. Okay, yeah, again, it's going to be one of those things. I could give, and depending on your side of the political aisle, you could say all sorts of examples of this. People who their intention is to do the right thing, but it comes out and makes a greater destruction than if they had just not done anything. Okay, that is righteous people, and the outcome is like the actions of the wicked. So that, King Solomon says, that is obviously Havel. Okay, that is obviously something that is at first glance, and even deeper into than first glance, you're going to look at that and say, wow, that's terrible. Okay, and perhaps there's a way that with enough wisdom we'll be able to distill it into something good. But on at least on the surface level, and how most people are going to view it, is that's going to be something that is so obviously Hevel. Okay, it's so obviously, again, if we just want to say futile, it's something that's futile, right? Good people trying to do good things, and unfortunately bad things happen because of it. So that, again, that fits very well with that first half over there of why is it that he declares this so blatantly as Hevel. It's obviously Hevel, right? You have good people trying to do good things and bad things happen. It's too bad. Okay, so that explains the first half of the verse. But now let's take a look again at the second half of the verse, and let's plug that same system into the second half. And he says, "V'yesh risha'im," there are also wicked people, shemagi'a alehem k'masei tzadikim, that they get the outcome of their actions is as though they did something righteous. Okay. King Solomon in his wisdom tells us, Amarti shagam zahava. I would tell you that also is hava. That also is, I'll just stick to futile, because even though I don't believe that's the translation of Havel, it fits a little better with the discussion right here. I would tell you that that's also something that's not great. It's also something that's futile. And that's where you need somebody to tell you that, because that's not so simple to see. Hold on a second. If you have bad people who are planning on doing bad things, but the outcome of their actions are righteous, why would that be Havel? Why would that be a futile thing? That kind of is a question right there. What's wrong with that happening? Some of the commentaries they point out over here, the Mitsuda being one of them, that part of the issue that shows up is a question of, really the question in general is a question of intention. And the problem is that if you have a wicked person who's planning on doing wicked things, but good things happen because of it, again, even though the sum total, the sum of it all is that good things have come about, something bad has happened actually. And that's because what we're going to do is, in some ways, we're going to desensitize ourselves to the wickedness, or in another way, we're going to perhaps heroify. Is that a word? Sounds right. I don't know. We're going to put a pet on a pedestal. We're going to put these Risha'im, these wicked people, on a pedestal for their actions that they have done, because we only see the result of their actions. Okay, again, you have somebody whose intention is inherently to do something wicked or evil or wrong or whatever, but the outcome is righteous. So he says, that sounds great. The problem is, I'm telling you that that's also a bad thing. Because what happens is, again, you make a hero out of somebody who's wrong, or you make or you change policy to reflect these actions that are done. You say, oh, see, it worked here, therefore it must be the right thing. Therefore, it must be something we should implement elsewhere. In reality, what you're looking at is kind of a quirk in the system. The system glitched almost. A wicked person did a wicked thing with wicked intentions, but good things happened. And unfortunately for us, great that we got good things to happen, but now we're going to now change how we look at things because of this one example. And he says that is going to be something that's Havel. That's going to be something that's, again, on the surface level, futile. On the surface level, terrible. because you're going to have this, the relationship to the wicked person is going to now change. We're now going to make a hero out of this wicked person for their actions. In a certain way, it kind of reminds me of Adam Smith, the father of of modern economics, who basically, amongst many other things he said, I just recently heard a podcast about it, so it's on my mind a little bit. But he was talking about his famous idea of the invisible hand, right? That sometimes you see that social matters are fixed because people are guided by an invisible hand, the desire for profit that leads them to then go ahead and do something that's better for society. Meanwhile, their intentions were never to better society. Their intentions were for profit. Now, I'm not saying that profit is wicked. I'm not saying that I'm not declaring one thing's wicked or not. But I am saying that an interesting idea over here is that, so we look at that and we say, look, luckily for us, there's people who maybe their intentions are in the wrong place, but good things have happened because of it. That's great, but what that ends up, what that causes is that we're going to go ahead and say, therefore, this person is great. Therefore, this policy is great. Therefore, this idea is great. And the danger of that is that now you've made a social change based on something that's anecdotal at best, basically. You've taken something that's... Yeah.
Sorry, is the implication that these are kind of one-off events or ongoing?
So that's a good question. I almost want to say that it's a one-off event because of the fact that Maaseh is in singular. And I think that's I wasn't necessarily thinking that at first, but now that you asked that, and that takes us back to a question we did not really address, is the fact that Maaseh is in the singular form. Almost sounds like, yeah, these things are really, you have to look at these realities not as bellwethers, but rather as anecdotal evidence. I think, yeah, that's what I would think. So again, what we have over here is part one of the verse is, again, obvious Havel, where good people have good intentions, they want to do good things, but bad things happen. That's obviously Havel. And then on part two is where you have bad people who want to do bad things with bad intentions, but the outcomes are good. We need King Solomon to come and tell us, yeah, that sounds great and everything, but that's also Havel. Now, Havel also is going to also have that connotation that we've always had of there's something good there too. Yes, there is it's almost the perfect example of Havel in a way, because it's something that's really bad. Maybe we don't see it as bad, but there's obviously a good thing to it. Luckily for us, we have whatever, luckily for us, we have some sort of, our society has gotten better. So yes, there is, again, in a certain way, a win, but there's also a loss. There's a major loss also in the way that we relate to wickedness and wicked people. Okay, so that I believe is the understanding of this verse number 12 over here. That there's again 2 lessons over here. Number one is that good people doing good things, but the outcome is in total bad. That is an unfortunate thing, but we have to kind of research that and kind of see where's the silver lining in that. And the other one is that when you have wicked people who do wicked things, but the outcome is good, sorry, he's warning us that that's just as bad as when bad things come out of good actions. He uses the same qualifier, that same Havel. In fact, he puts Shagam Zahavel. So this also is Havel, almost saying that these are just as bad as each other. Now, what does this have to do with our overall discussion? How does this relate to that wise person dealing with power? That shows up in the next verse over here. So without any further ado, I'll move on to verse number 15. Okay, I have to move my screen here for a second. Okay. All right, so this is verse number 15. Again, chapter 8, verse number 15. And King Solomon tells us like this: Vishibachti ani et hasimcha. I praise happiness. Asher ein tov la'adam tachat hashamash. For there is no good for a person under the sun, ki im lechov lishtot, except to eat and drink, vilismoach, and to be happy, vihu, and that yilvenu va'amalo will accompany that person in their hard work, yemei chayav, for the days of their life, asher natan lo ha'elokim, that God gives them, tachat hashamesh, under the sun. Okay, again, another long verse over here. Let's take that again step by step. V'shibachti ani et hasimcha. I praise happiness. Asher ein tov la'adam tachat hashamesh, for there is nothing better for a person under the sun, ki im lechov lishtot, but to eat and drink, vilismoach, and to be happy. Vihu, and that thing, Yilvenu va'amalo yemei chayav, will accompany them in their hard work through their life. Asher natan lo ha'elokim tachat hashamesh, that God gives them under the sun. The hard work of their days of their life that they are given to do under the sun. Okay, so as I said before, again, this is a long verse, and he kind of jumps back and forth, but he does something over here that we've seen a lot. If you joined us for the first half of the book, we saw this a lot. Which is where a lot of confusion comes about with the book of Kohelet, is he seems to say that, again, if you want to read the book in the depressing way, that life is just terrible. Well, then what is he doing every once in a while, throwing in these verses over here saying, eat, drink, and be merry? There's something to that. It's one of the best things for you in your life. That's a very strange thing for someone to say if they're trying to tell you how worthless the world is. Again, this is one of our clues to our theory that we try to say that the book of Kohelet is actually uplifting, maybe not uplifting, empowering, is that he throws in these verses every once in a while. But they always make sense in context. Okay? In this context over here, what is he trying to say? Because why is he saying that I praise happiness, and the best thing for a person is to eat and drink and be happy, and that thing, that happiness accompanies a person in all their hard work? So this brings us back to that big discussion. Okay, in that where you have people exerting power, right? We had in our last verse, we had the righteous people doing actions, but guess what? They don't have control over how their actions play out in the long term. You have wicked people who their intention is to do wicked, but nonetheless, their intentions do not play a role in the actual outcomes. That again is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the class, that ties us back to that idea that power is inherently limited in the fact that its jurisdiction is limited, not just limited by time, but power itself is limited in how powerful is power in the first place. And that's what we're saying over here in the last verse, at least, is he's telling us that the way that power, the nature of power is that power is, the powerful can only enforce their desires to a certain degree. You have people who with the best intentions and bad things happen. You have people with bad intentions and the good things happen. So if we're going to talk about the relationship between the righteous person on one side and the powerful person, so you have power that's going and enforcing, it's putting its will into the world and saying, I want the world to be one way. So how does the wise person respond to that? That's this verse over here, where King Solomon's telling us that the way a wise person responds to that, it says, I'm going to go ahead and with my life, I'm going to engage in happiness. Okay? I'm going to, whereas somebody is, let's give the obvious example. If you have an oppressive dictatorship, a power structure that's working to oppress you, so they could do all sorts of things to make you submit. They could make you work hard. They could take everything away from you. Whatever it is that they want to do, they could do to your body. But you will always have control over your reaction, and that's something that power can never. The powerful can never take away from the wise. The wise person looks at that situation and says, I can choose Shibachti, I praise happiness. And praise, in other words, it's up to me to determine to be happy with the situation. It's interesting, this little kind of middle piece over here, where he says, there's nothing better for a person than to eat and drink and be happy. Okay, well, eat and drink is wonderful insofar as you can eat and drink. Now, what if the oppressor takes that away from you? That's kind of the question that's going to face you, is if he's saying what's wonderful, the most wonderful thing in the world is to eat and drink and find happiness out of that. So then what happens when the person takes that away from you? What happens when, again, wise person versus powerful person, and powerful person takes away the food and drink of the wise person? Well, the wise person still has the ability to be happy. And I think that's why there's a switch over here. He says, nothing better for a person under the sun than to eat and drink and to be happy. But then he switches to a singular term over here. And he says, the who and that one thing, Yilvenu, will accompany them in all their hard work. So when you're in this struggle against power, and they impose upon the person hard work, the toil, amal, ayin mem lamed. We've discussed that a number of times. It specifically connotes hard work, right? We're talking about something that's it's difficult work. So, but nevertheless, happiness is something that can accompany the person, even their hard work. Okay, no matter what they take away from you, the fact is that you are able to. I would say it's a choice that a person can make to be happy. Now, I'm going to freely admit that happiness is not always a choice. There are many factors that can affect a person's happiness, even totally be outside of their abilities, chemically or in any other sort of way. So happiness is not always a choice, but I would say let's give it to him for right now. That's a bigger discussion that we could get into over here. But the ability to be happy is, insofar as it's a choice, so that choice is never something that can be affected by the powerful. So while the powerful person is oppressing the other people with hard work, the days of their lives, right, takes away achila and shtiya, takes away food and drink, nevertheless, they always have the choice to be happy, even so. And there's many stories of people. I mean, what we always go back to the Holocaust, right? That's what we do, because it's the most obvious and glaring example of this. But there's plenty of people who, yes, the Holocaust was one of the worst things to ever happen in human history, but there were some people who, through the entire thing, chose how to regulate their emotions. I would say maybe it's not always happy. Happy is perhaps almost a too specific thing over here. But let's call happiness emotions, regulation of emotions. That, to a certain degree, is something you always have control over. Maybe it's not happiness per se, but you always maintain the ability to decide how you want to emote in reaction to something. So maybe the opposite of happiness would be giving up, and happiness would be hope, or happiness would be seeing the good, or happiness would be, there's all sorts of definitions of what happiness is, even in the sages' discussion of what exactly happiness is. There's a lot of things that are brought down, most famous of them being who is happy, the one who is happy, who is glad, who is wealthy, the one who's happy with what they have. So there are a lot of discussions of exactly what happiness is in Judaism. But nevertheless, let's call it regulation of emotion. So he says that's something that they'll never be able to take away from you. Okay? No matter what they do otherwise. Okay. Just because we have a minute, I want to just point out some of the discussions that the sages point out in these verses over here. Going back to the verse before, they do say an interesting idea that they interpret this word asher not in the way of meaning that we usually interpret it. Asher, which we usually interpret the word asher to mean that. The sages do take that word. Sometimes, occasionally, they'll take it out of context and they'll say, actually means praiseworthy, like ashrei, like in the prayer of ashrei. Ashrei means praiseworthy are those who sit in your house, in the house of God. So in that sense over here would be praiseworthy are the righteous people who get the consequences of the wicked. And they throw in a perhaps a controversial idea, which is way beyond the scope of our class right now, but the idea that it's a good thing when a righteous person suffers because it clears the path for them in the world to come. Now that, again, I open up a can of worms by just mentioning that. What does that mean? How does the world come work? How does the world come work? What does suffering do for us? Again, I'm just pointing out what the rabbis say over here. They, as they are wont to do, they reveal a little bit and then cover up a whole bunch. That's the phrasing that we use. That they kind of just drop something on you and let you go and sit there and figure it all out. So that's a whole other discussion. I just thought that would be interesting to throw in. In this verse over here, in verse number 15, they also like to point out, we've seen this, sorry, whoa, okay, I'm losing track over here. Let's just, here. Sorry, my mouse messed up. Okay, in this verse number 15 over here, they point out another idea that whenever we talk about eating and drinking and being happy, it's also kind of a hint to the concept of learning Torah and doing mitzvot, doing commandments of God. Eating being learning Torah, I think, and drinking to be referring to doing the commandments, doing things that God asks us to do or tells us to do. So in that sense, if you want to take it on a more religious or spiritual level, he's telling us that there's nothing better in this world than for a person to engage in the commandments of God, and that's going to accompany you in the days of your life. Days of your life would then refer to the world to come. We see that also in the Passover Seder on the night of Passover. We refer to Yemei Chayav, the days of your life, referring to the world to come. Again, world to come is a big discussion. It's not nowhere near the scope of our discussion to talk about world to come. In fact, we've mentioned before that the whole Kohelet, he consistently and constantly reminds us that his whole discussion is Tachat Hashamesh, is under the sun. So in this very verse here, he says it twice. So we're not talking about otherworldly things. We're talking about here in this world, nothing better than eating, drinking, and being happy. And happiness they'll never be able to take away from you. Okay, no matter how oppressive they are, your mood, your regulation of emotions is always in your hands. So with that, let's go back to the regular screen. All right. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate you coming. Again, this was the end. We're nearing the end of chapter 8, so we'll pick up next week. We should be finishing the chapter. There's 2 more verses left, I think. Maybe it's just 1. I think it's two more verses left in the chapter. I believe it's going to be starting a new idea. So we'll see that next week.